There's really not many causes for optimism in the markets today because, as you said, it really is down to the moves that we've seen in the bond space and investors still digesting that messaging from the Fed around higher for longer. So that is the narrative very much in play. We've already got Kiwi stocks as well online to the downside. S&P 500 futures just looking fairly flat. But let's change on, take a look at what else is playing out in terms of the bond space, as we said, because we're continuing to see these moves here. We did see the 10-year yield as well inching higher overnight, and you can see at the front end of the curve as well those moves in the Antipodeans with the Kiwi, the Aussie 3-year. Likewise, just keeping a watch what happens with the Japanese bond space, given really that focus very much in the session today on the BOJ.
And coming up, we speak to Columbia University Center on Global Energy Policy on what climate policies were pledged at the UN General Assembly ongoing in New York. This is Bloomberg.
With T. Rowe Price Active ETFs, you can strive for market-beating returns. In a convenient solution, enjoy the benefits of ETFs and help your clients reach their destination. T. Rowe Price. Invest with confidence.
This is a project by the Bronx, for the Bronx, and of the Bronx. Bronx Point is a 500,000 square foot building that is going to include more than 500 apartments that are all affordable and the permanent home of the Universal Hip Hop Museum. I know the importance of having a bank that does what it says, and no one does that better than Wells Fargo. The Bronx is the birthplace of hip hop. This is a project that the Bronx can be proud of.
How can more women drive innovation in our industry? Women continue to be globally underrepresented in fields such as science, technology, engineering, and math. This reality inspired a series of initiatives designed to accelerate women's professional development within our operations. Discover how Aramco female researchers have been granted 352 U.S. patents and counting. Aramco, powered by How.
We are pursuing that all those pledges should be converted into tangible finances. If I have to give a figure, probably 1/10. There is a lot which needs to be done from our side also. We are trying to conceive projects related to which would be mitigation of this climate disaster.
Pakistan's caretaker Prime Minister Anwar ul-Haq Kakar on having received only a fraction of the $10 billion commitment from the global community after last year's devastating floods. Pakistan is among the countries most vulnerable to the current El Nino weather event. And of course, world leaders still at the United Nations General Assembly in New York this week calling for more collaboration over climate change, but divisions remain. Melissa Lott is the Director of Research at Columbia University Center on Global Energy Policy, and she's here with me in the New York studio. Thank you so much for coming in. Where are the deepest fractures right now?
I mean, I think the themes of the General Assembly and also Climate Week have been around collaboration, urgency, and finance, and there's some really big gaps across all three. So there's tensions about how we collaborate to actually address the urgency of climate change, and then how are we going to move money to the countries that need it to actually adapt and respond.
This division between rich countries and developing nations, how can it be overcome when the financing seems to be the issue now as we head towards COP28 in November?
Absolutely. So when we look at finance and we look at the real and perceived risks of moving large amounts of money to support sustainable development, we need to address those risks. Some of them are very real, whether we're talking about currency exchange risk or other things, and some of them are perceptions about how confident can I be that we're going to make this money back and we're going to make it back in short order.
So what are the next steps from here then until we get to November?
Yeah, so the next steps are to continue the conversations and to come up with real practical solutions to step forward. When we look at the urgency and the collaboration piece of it, in the middle of all the geopolitical tensions that we're dealing with right now, it's about what plans can work, where can we de-risk things together as multiple nations, as regions, and how does that translate into action to get emissions down while adapting to the climate change we're already seeing today.
Where are the lowest hanging fruits at the moment?
The lowest hanging fruits are how do we move our power sectors forward, so how we actually generate electricity, and how we simultaneously address sustainable development goals, so getting everyone hooked up to modern energy services and actually supporting full sustainable development while still making sure that we are mitigating and getting emissions down.
How is the weather event of El Nino this year going to make things worse?
I mean, this year what it is doing is bringing attention to what we know, that climate change is real, it's happening right now. This isn't some impact that's going to happen in the future. It's something that's happening to us today already. And so when we look at the urgency, in particular around communities, which has really come out in this year's Climate Week, how are communities responding? Because when you're in the middle of a flood or a multi-year drought or record-setting wildfires or heat waves, you have to respond today to make sure that your communities stay safe.
What do you mean by communities?
Yeah, so when I think about communities, I'm thinking about the local impacts of climate change. So when you are sitting there and in your town, in your region, not just in your nation, but in your neighborhood, on your block, you're seeing people struggle to afford their energy bills, to be able to use air conditioning if they have access to it. These are all things that are affecting people you care about, communities you care about today. So communities, cities, mayors are taking a lot of action.
When we're listening to the Prime Minister of Pakistan, he was talking about how he only got a tenth of the $10 billion commitment in order to continue recovery efforts from last year's devastating floods. But he didn't necessarily say that it was all because of the donors not bringing the money forth. It was also having to do with Pakistan needing to really have projects that can be financed and funded. How important is that side of the equation coming from developing nations themselves?
Absolutely. So having shovel-ready projects, having identified true opportunities to not build small one-off projects, so those are good, but to build the level of infrastructure we're talking about, those things are critical. And so whatever we can do to transfer skills, transfer lessons learned, say in one part of the world we have learned how to build certain pieces of infrastructure out, let's transfer that information to other regions of the world. It's really important.
Given what you've seen so far, especially with the UN General Assembly this week, how hopeful are you that we'll get any sort of breakthrough at COP28?
I'm hopeful that we're going to address some of the big challenges and the big elephants in the room. One of them is finance. How do we move huge amounts of capital? And that's one of the priorities going into COP this fall. And I think we're entering a place where we're having practical discussions of how to accelerate action. So we've moved well beyond the should we or should we do this quickly to the how do we do this quickly, practically, and in a way that supports development while we mitigate and adapt to climate change.
How much enthusiasm is there from the private sector?
I think the private sector is looking for direction. They're looking to know here's where we can invest, here's where we can move capital and know that we're going to have, security in terms of getting returns back. Here are projects that we know are going to, be good for our business and good for the world as we mitigate. And so they're enthusiastic and they want to be part of the conversation.
Well, so when you take a look at the narrative, right, which is that there's still a lot of talking, there's not a lot of commitments, and the scale that's needed for the energy transition just isn't there yet. Are you optimistic? And I guess to the point, are you optimistic that we're going to get there in time?
So I think there's a couple different pieces to this. One is we have not fully leaned into the scope and scale of what is needed to get us to net zero. We are not there yet. We are just at the point of discovering the initial steps in that. So until we absorb what that scope and scale looks like and move towards full solutions to get to net zero, we're not going to be moving quickly enough. But when it comes to moving to net zero, the other piece of it is the faster we move, the healthier our communities will be, and the more damage we can mitigate. And so I am already hopeful and optimistic because I've seen more progress in the last decade than I might have expected when I started my career 20 years ago in this field.
Melissa, ending up on a little bit of optimism there. Melissa Lott, Director of Research at Columbia University Center on Global Energy Policy.
Thanks for having me.
Well, coming up, South Korea is seeking to revive a three-nation summit with Japan and China this year. We get the latest next. This is Bloomberg.